Building an indie business in the center of venture capital. I am Alex Edmonds. People on the internet call me SupremeRumHam, and this is the Building an Indie Business podcast. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about a topic that I already talked about. I'm going to revisit this topic, and that topic is dogs and web development. So I'm going to talk about why I'm talking about it, and some other things, right? Yeah. So let me just get into it. So for new listeners, dogs and web development was one of the first 15 episodes of the podcast, and it was a test to see if people would click on any content about dogs. So I gave the episode a technical sounding name, but it was clickbait, and the title was Dogs and Web Development. At the time, I was getting 15 downloads an episode, and I said 25 would make a difference. I got 17 downloads and said that the change was insignificant. I recorded the episode 5 days after I released the episode. I recorded too soon. That was my mistake. It was my mistake because the episode became my most downloaded episode on Anchor. People kept downloading it like weeks after the episode, even months, right? My thinking was that people would scroll down on my catalog of episodes and dogs and web development would catch their eye. And but now I have 150 plus episodes. I have too many episodes for people to scroll down and see the episode. Right? They'd have to be like a hardcore fan of the podcast to go all the way down to my catalog of episodes. So since moving to Caproni, the episode only has 6 downloads, and there are episodes with 100, 150, 200 downloads. So it's not very significant. So, and then another thing that I've kind of been looking at is that when you Google dogs and web development, but the episode doesn't show up on Google or dogs and web development podcast, but it'll show up for other random things on Google. So it shows up for direct listing podcast. But also I think the reason why it doesn't show up on Google is because this was before I knew about SEO or transcripts. So there's no transcript for the episode. I didn't optimize the page for SEO. I think this was before I had I recorded the episode before I had the podcast website, because if it was one of the first 15, I didn't have the podcast website until 2020. So that might be another thing also, right? There's no just the regular website to show up. Because the thing with Google is that if you type in direct listing podcast, the actual podcast episode will show up. But if you do like Stripe Gumroad podcast, the Google search page will show up, not the actual podcast, right? So that's another thing, right? Okay. And then I did the same thing with coffee, and I wanted to test it out. I wanted to test out this concept with another popular item that people might just click on if they had the same content, right? Or like, right. So like the reason why I did the dogs and web development episode was because I was in a chat room with someone, or not a chat room, like a forum, and they said like I'd click anything, any content related to dogs. So I just did dogs and web development, my podcast episode, and see if that happened. if people would randomly click on it. And I think that happened, right? So for fun, I wanted to see if people would do the same thing with coffee, right? And so I did it, right? The episode wasn't as popular as Dogs, but it was right behind Dogs. If Dogs had 100 downloads, then Coffee had 98. Another thing is that the episode shows up on Google for the result Coffee and Web Development Podcast. So that's something interesting, right? And I think I did this episode by January of 2020. So the episode has a transcript, so that might be something, right? Because in this episode I've said dogs and web development like 30 times, and so maybe the same thing with coffee and web development. And this episode will have a transcript too, so it's yeah. And then on Caproni, this episode has 3 downloads, so it cuts it in half. Okay, so why am I revisiting this whole topic and incident? Because I did the episode analysis too early. So there was coffee and web development, and then there were results of coffee and web development. Same with dogs and web development, right? And the results of episode was an analysis of the episode and like explaining all the stats that I saw. I feel like I did it too early because I only did it 5 days into the episode, and it didn't do a proper analysis. But I did do it properly for coffee and web development. For coffee and web development, let's check. I did it a couple, maybe months later. So let's go to Caproni. We're going to Caproni. Okay. Going to episodes. And we are searching coffee. Cafe. Okay. I can't search it. So let's check my phone, right? So I'm going to check my phone. So, yes, sir, I am checking. Oh, I'm here. Coffee. Oh my god, I can't search for it. So, let me go all the way down. So, I believe it was January. Okay, so coffee and web development results January 6th, 2020. So that means the coffee episode was way down there. Okay. It's October and I don't. Oh, okay. So October 14th, 2019. And it was January 2020 for the results. So I did the episode October, November, December, January, 4 months later, right? So that gave me a better analysis, and I was able to actually say, like, oh, was this effective or was this not effective? So yeah. And then another reason why I'm discussing this is I want to see if it blows up, right? I want to see if the Dogs and Web Development episode was a one hit, or maybe I do it now and it does the same thing again. But also, I did the results of episode, and that isn't as popular as Dogs and Web Development, so I'm not sure, because it had Dogs and Web Development in the title, right? So yeah, and then the final thing I want to say is that so this works, right? And I have a bunch of new listeners, like back then people weren't listening to the podcast, but now people are. So maybe they're hearing this for the first time, and maybe they test out, using dog pictures as a placeholder in their tutorials instead of people, right? And that tutorial gets more views now because they heard this episode and they got through the idea, or they used the idea, right? So maybe this helps someone. Okay, that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day. Bye.